Hello everyone, this is Ben, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the ethics of the trans rights movement, trying to examine, well, is it a good thing, is it a bad thing, or how does it justify itself as a good thing, or perhaps fail to do so. So the first question we need to take a look at is, can we reshape, rebuild, modify our culture so that trans people feel included? If we use people's preferred pronouns and put our own preferred pronouns in all of our social media accounts and allow people to compete in sports under their preferred gender and allow people to use the bathrooms of their preferred gender, etc., 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 would that work? And on top of that, wouldn't that exclude other people? So the trans suicide rate is alarmingly high, but what if efforts to include trans people just end up excluding other people? Can your culture really make everybody happy? What if conservatives were killing themselves, quitting their jobs, losing their families, and all sorts of other bad things were, they were engaging in all kinds of self-destructive behavior because they felt excluded by the culture? How is it possible to include everyone? There are both Muslim and Christian groups who have become suicidal over their belief that a trans-inclusive culture hurts the world. Creating a trans-inclusive culture will exclude other groups. Should we create a suicidal religious cult inclusive culture? Should we create a suicide bomber inclusive culture? Many of these are deeply hurt by the trans rights movement. You may not think they are hurt, but they do. It's literally impossible to follow your rule of including everyone. Any way you structure your society, some group will be deeply damaged by it. It's because everyone defines damage in their own way. For that matter, how far does the rule to avoid upsetting people go? For example, since the majority of suicides are male, should we ban women from divorcing their husbands? And when exactly should we expect trans people to have resilience against disapproval? Any society that allows people to believe what they want will also mean that there's always someone who disapproves of you. The right to freedom cannot be separated from the responsibility of enduring disapproval. Now, I'm sure that trans rights activists will tell me that trans people are already resilient, they're already enduring a great deal, and that the trans rights activists simply want to lessen the burden on trans people. Okay, but when exactly is it enough? When are trans people expected to be resilient? When is culture not going to change any further? At some point, you're going to be forced to think, to believe that it's perfectly okay for trans people to experience disapproval at some point. So tell us, where is that point? There has to be one. Another question is a basic question that needs to be asked is what is a woman? It's not really an ethical question. It's a question about existence. Not about the way the world ought to be, but about the way the world is. What is a woman exactly? And for that matter, what is a man? Or specifically, borrowing from G.K. Chesterton, what exactly is a real man? So many men worry about whether or not they're manly and what it means to be a real man, but Chesterton put it like this. He said, do dogs wonder if they're real dogs? Do whales worry if they're really whaley enough? It's just something you are, How can you, and this I get from Dr. Thomas Bogardus, this next part, how can you identify as a woman if the word woman literally is defined as anyone who identifies as a woman? So if a woman is someone who identifies as a woman, what are you identifying as exactly? What is a woman? A woman is someone who identifies as a woman. So what are you identifying as? I'm identifying as someone who identifies as someone who identifies as. What is it? If a trans woman is genetically male but had female brain development in the womb, how did you identify it as female brain development? How can there be a scientific basis for people, the existence of trans people? I think there is a scientific basis for it, but how can there be such a thing unless we've already identified a group of people as female? Isn't it because you know a group of people who share a function of bearing children? That's kind of how they function. That's how females function, right? They bear children. Isn't female brain development just what we know to be typical of people who we already identified as female? People who function as bearing children. And then there's the question of the Bible. The Bible prohibits homosexual practice. Jesus said it in Matthew 19 that the reason sex and marriage exist, he says this in Matthew 19, is because we're male and female. It's not that homosexuality is some sort of super duper sin. It's just not what God intended. 1 Corinthians 6 sometimes gets brought in to say that it is a super sin, but what 1 Corinthians 6 tells us in Paul's sin list there is that homosexual offenders won't inherit the kingdom of heaven. Paul is not talking about the afterlife, after you die. He's talking about heaven invading earth now, while you're still alive on earth. He's talking about heaven invading earth, recapturing and transforming the human heart. As you pray, read the Bible, encourage each other, and obey as best you can in faith, God transforms your character into one that finds it easy and easier over time to be good. Wouldn't we all want that? Wouldn't we all want to be less selfish, less angry, less jealous, less cowardly, less worried, more loving, more obedient, more hardworking, and more honest? And why isn't because the Bible says so enough? Even if some of God's rules don't make sense to us, they could still make sense to God, because God knows things that we don't know. You see, we all sense that things, for example, like murder and slavery are wrong. We don't need God to tell us that. He says that it's wrong in the Bible, but we know it anyway. We have this sense of that. We're aware of it. But people who believe the Bible could know more about right and wrong and shouldn't expect others to understand. It's because we believe the Bible. Jesus claimed to be sent by God. We know God exists through philosophical arguments. We can prove historically that God raised Jesus from the dead, thus confirming that Jesus is Lord and his apostles are trustworthy. We know what they wrote through historical study. So what they tell us Jesus taught them is trustworthy and from God. So if this is the case, and clearly it is, we can trust the Bible, and the Bible says it's wrong. But we shouldn't expect non-Christians to think it's wrong. Now, sometimes people argue that the existence of a transgender person disproves the Bible because the Bible says transgender people don't exist. Well, it doesn't actually say that. Where does it say that? It says God created humanity. He made Adam and Eve, and they're male and female, and humanity is male and female. But that doesn't mean that there can be no variation on down the line, or people who kind of link, a man with more of a feminine personality, or a little bit of a feminine man, or a little bit of a masculine woman. Where does this extreme black and white, where? And then in Matthew 19, Jesus even says that there are some people who are eunuchs who are born that way. That sounds like someone, there are people who are born with male and female genetics. They exist. they're not truly intersex because there are intersex animals that can reproduce. This is more of someone who didn't quite fit into the either or. But anyway, that's the end of this video. Hopefully it gives you guys something to think about. Thank you so much for your time.